Hello and good day to everyone. My name is Dora Dunatov and I'm a research assistant at the Institute of Ethnology and Folklore Research in Zagreb, Croatia. This presentation is a part of a bigger research conducted at the aforementioned institute. In short, the project focuses on record industry present in Croatia and ex-Yugoslavia from 1927 to 1960. I'm working along with a team of Croatian ethnomusicologists and musicologists who provide their own expertise with one joint idea of locating and documenting 78rpm records issued in ex-Yugoslavia. We are also working on a large online and publicly available database that lists records issued by 3 record companies, Edison Belpenkala, Elektroton and Yugoton, which you can find visiting the website of our project Diskograf, listed at the top of the screen. My part of the research goes beyond the borders of Yugoslavia and reaches overseas, as the title of this paper clearly suggests. In other words, this paper will reveal the steps I took in order to see how 3 rather small record companies recording local music in the whole country positioned themselves within the South Slavic diasporic communities in the US, and actually whether it was even possible to reach the audience overseas during the first half of the 20th century. And this is what you can expect to see and hear in the next 20 minutes. First, I will present the research methods employed for this research. After that, I will provide a really brief introduction to 3 record companies the project is focused on, and their socio-political and historical contexts. This is just in order to ensure that you can follow the steps I took trying to find out whether and how these companies reach diasporic communities. Then I will concisely portray what music making in South Slavic diasporic communities in the US meant for the first 50 years of the 20th century. Along with this, some of the foreign indie labels as well as record retailers will be briefly introduced. Finally, I shall divide the first 60 years of the 20th century to pre- and post-Second World War period in order to see the level of music and record exchange between the old and the new countries. So the research was done primarily through archive work, browsing through Croatian and Yugoslav periodicals that were released during the first half of the 20th century, of which the most informative turned out to be Zajedničar newspaper and Matica journal, as well as through relevant books and songbooks. Zajedničar and Matica are diasporic periodicals that are actually currently available in Croatia, which is why it might seem that I somehow emphasize Croatian part of the South Slavic diaspora in this paper, even though it was not the primary intention. I do hope to expand it to other nations with the research that is actually still ongoing. And the other important part of the research was done through interviews with people that identified themselves as members or descendants of South Slavic diasporic communities, either musicians or collectors. Some important interviews and archive work will come through on a fieldwork in the US that I am currently conducting, and I mean currently as we speak, from Peraluma near San Francisco. Okay then, let's go to the main actors of this research. First one, Edison Belpenkala, or shortly EBP. Operating within Yugoslavian monarchy that encompassed territory of what is currently known as Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Kosovo and Northern Macedonia. Established in 1927 in Zagreb, today capital of Croatia, and active for a decade. Directly succeeded by Elektroton record company that opened its branch in Zagreb, buying off some of the EBP's old machines and matrices. Elektroton operated during the Second World War, which strongly contributed to its end when the communist government re-established Yugoslavia, this time as the Federal People's Republic. Elektroton's property was nationalized and a new state record company was established in Zagreb in 1947, titled Yugoton. All 3 of them recorded local musicians, but also traded matrices with other record companies from Europe and the US. Considering their imprint on local market, those 3 were considered rather small companies, focused on national audience, in the context of Yugoslavia, of course. Nevertheless, it is interesting to see their imprint within the diasporic community, of which the particular importance during the first half of the 20th century lies particularly within US diaspora. That period saw two important and actually immense waves of emigration to North America, the first one mainly out of socio-economic reasons at the turn of the century, and the second one out of political reasons after the Second World War. This resulted in a huge number of South Slavic immigrants living in the US and slowly building their economic power. Naturally, along with economic power came the possibility to buy luxury items such as gramophone and gramophone records. This is why US diaspora seemed as the most fruitful community to test the imprint of those small record companies outside of the local border. As far as music making in Yugoslav diaspora goes, it was very vivid during the first half of the 20th century. It was pertained by several choirs, but more importantly by various dance and tamburica ensembles that started gaining more and more attention outside of local community, getting recognized by wider US public. Here on the screen, on the left side, you can see one of the first pictures of California Colo Dance Ensemble. And throughout the screen there are other newspaper clips that testify how often concerts and live performances were held featuring ethnic and repertoire mainly in Croatian or Serbian language. Those ensembles often performed for South Slavic radio hours. Such was the Croatian or Yugoslav radio hour shown on the right side. Those songs they played were brought both from an old country and learned through songbooks, for example, but also perhaps through some recordings. These newspaper clips show how popular tamburica ensemble were within record industry, whether they were recorded with or without a particular singer, such as Ante Šoljanić on Slavtone records. Recordings of South Slavic music that circulated in the US until 1950s were mainly issued by big companies such as Victor, Columbia and Odeon. Later on, small indie labels appeared specialized for Croatian, South Slavic or Balkan music in general, such as, for example, Zora, Slavtone, Stenčel, Corona, Sonar, Plavi Dunav, Lira, Jadran and Balkan record companies. These are just some of the examples of record labels that appeared in advertisements throughout these newspapers. The advertisements in Croatian Zajedničar newspaper listed an important number of ethnic record retailers, settled mainly within bigger Croatian or Serbo-Croatian communities around the US. They are listed in blue boxes on the screen. These places were mainly in Pittsburgh, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, New York, but also on the western coast, such as Oakland and Los Angeles. The research has shown that retailers were mainly people who were involved in music business, either as musicians, more precisely tamburica players, either as folk dancers, or even as influential politicians. In any case, retailers had to be extrovert types of people with strong connections to a wide range of South Slavic communities throughout the US. Such was the case of Ivan Filčić, who operated in Oakland during the 1950s. He was actually the one that started Colo Dance Ensemble in 1949 and later on organized very influential folk dance festivals. Now he is rightfully considered as a pillar of folk dance community in the US. Maybe the most interesting information is that he still dances and sells his records in his 90s. An amazing individual who defies the laws of average human possibilities with inspiring will and mental strength. He is the one I'll meet later today at a statewide folk dance festival in Petaluma.
Hi, I am John Filčić. I was born in 1924, sort of on the boundary of Croatia and Italy. It was the former Yugoslavia at the time, with the king, a monarchy. And in 1931, we emigrated to America, to Gary, Indiana, which is a steel town, steel mills, and it was basically a Slavic town because steel mills required manual labor, and the Slavic, mostly peasantry, and many illiterate, such as my father, worked at manual labor in the steel mills. And actually, that would have been my destiny if other things hadn't interfered.
And the other equally important retailer was a member of Serbo-American community named John Palandic or Ivan Palandacic, who supplied the record market in Chicago and its surroundings throughout the first half of the 20th century. He was a very important immigrant publisher, politician, and entrepreneur, as well as media celebrity at the time. His life and work were analyzed in an article by Vladimir Fischer-Nebmaja, published in 2019. The main reasons why South Slavic music, and in particular songs, lived through displacements and through decades surrounded by foreign culture is because they were seen as a means to preserve the language of ancestors. Some testimonies could be read in newspapers, such as these two quotations. For example, "Let's all gather to recognize the choir that has, by performing Slavic songs, kept our national awareness alive for many years here in this new Croatian settlement and has gathered around young ones so that they don't go astray from their people." Or the other quotation, "It is up to you, dear children, to guard the musical instrument of your ancestors, for it will help you preserve your mother tongue." Now, quickly getting back to the Yugoslav labels concerning the level of gramophone record exchange prior to the Second World War. Even though Edison Belpenkala and Electroton record companies both issued records using the matrices made by large record companies, such as Victor, Columbia, His Master's Voice, and Odeon, they didn't really sell back their own matrices. Their recordings stayed generally within Yugoslavian monarchy. And the most logical explanation why they couldn't reach overseas through the 1945 would be because of the strength of those big companies that supplied and in a way monopolized foreign markets with their own recordings of the South Slavic music, whether it was recorded in Yugoslavia or whether they recorded musicians that lived within the diaspora community. On the screen is an example of the same song recorded by the same record label and performed by two different musicians, one living in and working in Belgrade and one immigrant living and working in the US. They both sang one very famous song titled Kradem ti se, written by Serbian composer Petar Konjović. We'll briefly listen to the recording of Edubitch, quite famous Bosnian singer that quickly became a star both at home and in the new country. He is accompanied by Balkan Tamburica Orchestra, led by Martin Kapuđi.
Kradem ti se u večeri pod penđeri, da ti bacim struk zumbula, da ti cvet prozbori. Koliko te silno ljubim, aman, mirem dušo za tobom. Koliko te silno ljubim, aman, mirem dušo za tobom. ti ne haješ za bolove je srca moga. Mladost vene, cvet se suši, sevda hode u zaman. Allah nek ti drugog nađe, a ja ginem dušo za tobom. Allah nek ti drugog nađe, a ja ginem dušo za tobom.
Situation regarding record exchange after the Second World War finally changed. In other words, the South Slavic diaspora community in the US could finally hear local musicians selected and recorded by Yugoslav Record Company. At the time, the biggest and for a couple of years, the only Yugoslav record company that issued 78 RPMs featuring local musicians was Yugoton, a state company that emphasized not only newly composed songs that praised communism, the new ruling system in Yugoslavia, but also emphasized ethnic repertoire with traditional instrumental and, more importantly, vocal instrumental music from all around Yugoslavia. Yugoton circulated within US diaspora during 1950s, thanks to both Johns, John Filčić in Oakland and Los Angeles with his Slav Art Music Company and Yugoslav Record Store, and John Palandic with his Palandic Record Store in Chicago. But apart from Palandic and Filčić, who both mainly issued Yugoton under its own label, there were some other companies that issued Yugoton's recordings under their own labels. Such were these two on the screen, Permaton and Balkan Records. We will just briefly listen to this Permaton recording of the song Ja sam mladi Dalmatinac, sang by Miljenko Sutlović and Petar Tralić with mandolin quartet.
Ja sam mladi Dalmatinac i ribara svih ljubimac. Kuća mi je barka i drojka tarka, moje drage ljubav žarka. Kuća mi je barka i drojka tarka, moje drage ljubav žarka. Rivom kad zasija luna i zapiva sva straduna, ja po moru plovim, moje zlato volim i sa mrežom ribe.
And finally, a brief conclusion to this paper. You have seen how, in order to analyze the position of three Yugoslav record companies, I needed to take the fieldwork 5,000 miles west and almost a century in the past. This temporal and physical displacement is a rather challenging task for the researcher, especially considering the deterioration of the material that witnessed happenings in the history, such as gramophone records themselves being lost, broken, dissolved, and reproduced for other purposes, or newspapers, partially preserved, politically influenced, and as such presenting only one side of the past, or even people whose lives revolved around those particular South Slavic 78 RPM records in the US more than 60 years ago, gone along with their testimonies and heritage. These instances complicate the research, but also make it more interesting. So as this research is still actually ongoing and the fieldwork in the US has just begun, I hope to gain more information on this matter with time. If you have any additional information, comment, suggestion, or you just want to talk about this topic, Please feel free to contact me anytime at dunatovdora@gmail.com. Thank you for your patience.